George Bush, and she'd been to the White House many times. Quite how he failed to recognise her when she spoke in front of him remains to this day to be a mystery. But to be fair, it could be that his vision was completely clouded with tears. But I'm afraid I don't believe that. Now the second illegal invasion of Iraq was predicated on two things. Firstly, an unproven and false link between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. And secondly, the Iraqi army's mythical and yet as still undiscovered weapons of mass destruction. If you remember, Colin Powell held up an empty glass vial and said that if it was full of poisonous gas, it could be very dangerous indeed. Tony Blair also claimed falsely that Iraq could attack UK citizens in Cyprus within 45 minutes. This was actually presented in the public as they could attack England within 45 minutes. Both of these claims turned out to be false. Regardless of the obvious fraud, the public opinion was actually favourable enough to invade. Now this is despite mass street protestations and the highly suspicious suicide of Dr. David Kelly, a weapons inspector who publicly accused the government of sexing up reports. A remarkable number of the general public felt that the invasion was actually justified. Even if people felt that the propaganda was false or that the true nature of the action was a crusade to secure oil, the fact that we were there to remove the butcher of Baghdad, this mythical figure, was in some people's views enough, regardless of to how much this demonisation was accurate or Western propaganda. Now the fictional rape scenario also reared its ugly head again during the 2011 NATO liberation of Libya. Reports circulated in the Western media that soldiers loyal to Gaddafi had been equipped with the erectile dysfunction drug Viagra and ordered to indiscriminately and violently rape any and every woman that they happened across. These stories are remarkably similar to those told during the First World War, and once again they were discovered and proven to be complete and total fabrications. Sir Stuart Campbell, who worked with Lord Northcliffe of Wellington House fame, Wellington House being the precursor to Tavistock, they worked together at Crewe House, which was another British wartime propaganda factory, and he explained how you would create effective propaganda. He said, "Creation of a favourable atmosphere is the first object of propaganda. Until this psychological effect is produced as the result of military events, propagandist activity or internal political disaffection, the mentality of enemy troops and civil population, and both are equally important in modern warfare, will be naturally unsympathetic and unresponsive to influence. In order to produce this atmosphere of receptivity and susceptibility, continuity of propaganda policy is indispensable." So basically this is what we're talking about. We're talking about creating an atmosphere where people feel that regardless of civilian deaths and stuff like, this guy is such a bad guy, Colonel Gaddafi, Ahmadinejad, Hussein, that's all that we focus on essentially. Now, it might be interesting to note that Lord Northcliffe of Crewe House and Wellington House was the proprietor of the Times and the Daily Mail. Wellington House also included Lord Beaverbrook, who owned the Daily Express, and he was the Minister of Propaganda Information. I also find it slightly amusing that the Daily Mail in the 30s were involved in anti-Nazi propaganda, but you know, fair enough. Both sides of the fence apparently. In September 2011, the ITV television network in the UK apologised after footage it broadcast in a documentary said to be from an IRA propaganda video was exposed to be in fact a cutscene from a computer game. The pictures were used in the documentary Exposure, which tried to show a spurious link between Colonel Gaddafi and the IRA. The footage, labelled IRA Film 1988, was reportedly of terrorists using Libyan rocket launchers to bring down a helicopter, but was in reality from the war simulation game Arma 2. This is all taken from a computer game. A statement from ITV claimed, The events featured in Exposure, Gaddafi and the IRA, were genuine, but it would appear that during the editing process the correct clip of the incident was not selected and other footage was mistakenly included in the film. This was an unfortunate case of human error for which we apologise. Now, to me, this seems a bit too much of a coincidence, considering at the time the media was pushing for a NATO-led intervention into Libya. And this appeared to be, instead, to be a case of poorly executed demonisation tactics. Genuine footage of this reported attack, or actually any confirmation that the incident took place at all, has never come forward. So we're to assume that not only is the footage fake, but the incident was a lie too. In December 2011, Fox News repeatedly showed footage from the recent austerity riots in Greece, whilst trying to claim that we were watching destruction on the streets of Moscow in reaction to the re-election of Putin, or for the forthcoming elections. This was despite the fact that a Greek bank with the sign written in Greek alphabet stood in the background. Many of these Russian activists were actually wearing t-shirts, which is not entirely suitable for a Moscow December. Right, I'm going to go slightly off script here. Okay, everyone's seen Pussy Riot, this band, Pussy Riot, yeah? Anyone fell for it? No. Good. Right, I wanted to tell you a few things. Pussy Riot, for those people that don't know, is an anarcho-punk band that basically broke into a church in Russia, performed what they called a punk's prayer, and then were basically arrested, and they've been thrown in prison for 2 years, and this has been vilified in the Western press. Dozens and dozens of celebrities, musicians, politicians, everybody under the sun has got behind this band, Pussy Riot. Now, first thing I want to say is they're not a band. They don't play instruments. They have no songs. They have performed no punk actions, no activist actions, except for the one that got them into trouble. Okay. Secondly, they now have a song out on which none of the members of the band play instruments, although I think one of them sings. This song was financed, produced and recorded by the American State Department. Exactly. I'd also like to point out that, okay, I have no care one way or the other about what they did, but if they did what they did in America, not only would they be there for 2 years, they'd be there for possibly 10 years. The result of their actions could have resulted in a 10-year prison sentence in America. So this concept of Russia being terrible to these people is nonsense. It's absolute garbage. What it is there for is this very, very subtle destabilisation process. What we're seeing, you know, because in the next couple of weeks, when we try to invade Syria, Iran or any of those places, Russia are basically there going, this isn't a good idea. The general public will go, yeah, but Russia are mentalists. They throw women in prison for 2 years for making a public statement. So please don't fall for it. There's been several other things that have happened actually recently. The nude pictures of Kate Middleton. The nude pictures of Prince Harry. Does anyone believe for a second, you know, if you can get a telephoto lens strong enough to actually see Kate Middleton's naked body, you could get a sniper's scope there as well. Are we really believing that security on the princess is that lax? Or is this yet another example of trying to normalise these people? They're just like you and me. They're just like, oh, poor them. I feel embarrassed for them, poor girl. Like, it's rubbish. Please don't buy it. Same thing with the recent chief whip insulting the police. Again, who cares, to be quite honest? But I did notice that this was a fabulous distraction away from the results of the Hillsborough result. It's a fabulous distraction away from the lies that are being told in the Mark Duggan inquest. And it's also a fabulous distraction from the death of Ian Tomlinson at the G20. Anyway, back to the script. Now, to prove that this sort of thing happens a lot, political journalist Peter Oborne stated on the BBC's Newswipe programme that collusion between media and government stretches down to a very, very detailed and precise level. In 2003, the UK Sun newspaper launched a campaign against asylum seekers in Britain with a series of sensationalist headlines such as "Halt the Asylum Tide Now," "The Biggest Crisis Facing the UK Today," and "Our Heritage is Crumbling." The campaign was, on the face of it, very critical of the then Labour government. The culmination of the Sun's operation was an interview with the then Home Secretary David Blunkett, who was forced to admit, "I can't argue with the Sun over asylum." The newspaper had seemingly taken up a cause that was pressing in the minds of the public and forced the reluctant government into action, which was presented not only as a victory for the Sun, but also for the general public whom the paper was championing. Journalist Peter Oborne later managed to find a copy of what was known as the Downing Street Grid. Now, this is a month-by-month calendar of upcoming and important media and social events pertaining to the government. To his surprise, Oborne discovered that that particular month's calendar, printed weeks before the Sun campaign, actually contained the very campaign that appeared in the newspaper in incredible detail, including the date and the content of the future Blunkett interview. The grid also detailed how the government would react to the Sun campaign in the public. Now, this means that the campaign that the Sun presented as a spontaneous and organic attack on asylum seekers and government procedure on behalf of the people was in fact part of the government's own public relations policy. This was nothing more than an orchestrated performance which served to trick the public into believing that they had an effect on the government, and more importantly, that the government and their media were listening to their opinion. And this is by no means an isolated incident. The relationship between the media and the government is far more Machiavellian than we would actually believe. It's not about facts or critical analysis, but perception management. Who controls the past and who controls the present? As Orwell stated, who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. For examples of control of information to shape public opinion, one need only examine the mainstream portrayal of the deaths of Dr. David Kelly, Charles de Menendez, Osama bin Laden. Even the mainstream media cites certain discrepancies within the facts of all of their deaths. Hitler famously stated, "The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it." Goebbels is paraphrased as stating, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it." Napoleon proclaimed that history is written by the winners. Fox News claims to be fair and balanced. Now, despite their genocidal tendencies, in this particular case, the three tyrants are actually significantly more honest than the news media. Now, the CIA has never been shy about courting the media. William Colby, the former director, was cited by Dave McGowan in Derailing Democracy as making this astonishing claim: the CIA owns everyone of any significance in the major media. A CIA operative discussing the availability and prices of journalists willing to peddle agency propaganda and cover stories was quoted in the book Catherine the Great by Deborah Davis as boldly stating, "You could get a journalist cheaper than a good call girl for a couple $100 a month." William Bader, a former CIA intelligence officer, announced when briefing members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, "There is quite an incredible spread of relationships. You don't need to manipulate Time magazine, for example, because there are CIA agency people at the management level." And this was reported in the article "The CIA and the Media" by Carl Bernstein, which we touched on earlier. And in the same article, it had this claim: "The agency's relationship with the New York Times was by far its most valuable among newspapers. According to CIA officials, it was general policy to provide assistance with the CIA whenever possible. According to declassified CIA documents, ABC News was also used as a cover for active agents in the 1960s. Now, the CIA or the MI6 are not the only controlling forces to utilise the media for their own ends. Industrial concerns also influence the facts that we are fed through the media. Under law, the director of a company is obliged to act in the interests of his own company. An unanswered dilemma is what happens when an officer of Corporation A, who sits as a director on the board of Corporation B, has to choose between acting in the best interests of his own company or one on whose board he sits. What is the proper behaviour of a banker who is a director of General Electric, owner of NBC, if he hears that the network is about to produce a documentary highly embarrassing to the banking industry? It could be that the best interests of NBC News to attract an audience with a documentary on what could be a compelling public issue. Yet, such a documentary might not be perceived as being in the best interests of the banks, and in such cases, that documentary would not go ahead, because as I've stated, it is illegal for somebody to do something to the detriment of their shareholders, which is insane. The emergence of major national and multinational corporations as collectors of controllers of most of the country's media has enormously complicated the potential conflicts of interest in, among other things, interlocked boards of directors. A study by Peter Dreyer and Stephen Weiberg in 1979 found interlocked directors in major newspaper chains. For example, Gannett, which is a publishing house, shared directors with Merrill Lynch, Standard Oil, 20th Century Fox, Kerr McGee, who are an aerospace and nuclear power company, McDonnell Douglas Aircraft, McGraw-Hill, Eastern Airlines, Phillips Petroleum, Kellogg's, and the New York Telephone Company. The most influential paper in America, the New York Times, interlocked with Merck, Morden Guarantee, Bristol Myers, Charter Oil, Johns Manville, American Express, Bethlehem Steel, IBM, Scott Paper, Sun Oil, and the First Boston Corporation. Time, Inc. has so many interlocks that they almost represent a plenary board of directors of US business and finance. They interlock with Mobil Oil, AT&T, American Express, Firestone, Trim and Rubber Company, Mellon National Corporation, Atlantic Richfield, Xerox, General Dynamics, and most major international banks. In the early 1970s, New York Times publisher Arthur Sulzberger admitted that he and his editors censored stories concerning automobile safety and pollution concerns due to the worry of affecting advertising revenue. In an interview with Herman Held on CBS television in 1983, it was stated that advertising agencies were always taken into account in order not to offend them during the production of television pieces. So, when media outlets are proven, at the very least, to make errors in the accuracy of their reporting, why do we, the general public, still turn to them as the authoritative oracle of truth? You see, we have established belief structures that are supported by the society we live in, endorsed continuously by the various media outlets that envelop us. Psychologically, this is very comforting to the individual as it builds a sense of security and a similarity of consciousness through which we feel part of a wider protective group. The established norms and accepted truths of any given society are vigorously defended by the members of the general public and backed up by the opinions of authority figures, namely the media, academia, and general established folk knowledge. Beliefs that question or critique the status quo can be met with anger and confusion. Facts, no matter how elegantly presented, are often dismissed out of hand if they prove something that an individual simply does not want to believe. Now this is due to the psychological processes at work reinforcing the perceived attributes of the protective mass in which we wallow. To protect the idea of the larger whole to which we psychologically attach ourselves, we will become willfully ignorant of anything we happen to learn that does not come from prescribed channels of information. This is why subjects that are deemed conspiratorial are often dismissed or ridiculed with no attention being given to the evidence. The problem is that if we question one aspect of our perceived reality which turns out to be different to our expectations, this suggests that other things we have taken as given facts may also turn out to be untrue. Not only do we not want to feel duped as an individual, an easy rube who can be manipulated against our will, but we also don't want to believe that the beast to whose belly we cling so tightly for protection may not have our best interests at heart. Psychologist Charles Tart, formerly of the University of California, calls this phenomenon consensus trance. Tart believes that the collective society literally convinces itself that certain facts are self-evident, and in this way we are willingly hypnotized into a particular way of thinking. Consensus trance, an automated state of consciousness, actually the normal consciousness, based on the premise that people believe what they are told to be true as opposed to what they have themselves realized to be true. A very basic example of this is that we, whoever we are always presented as the good guys in any military conflict. We know we're the good guys because the media constantly reinforces this, explaining the necessity for any intervention and the noble and honourable intentions of our leaders. This manifests itself often as unquestioning support of the government and the troops and a particular type of rabid patriotism, which is essentially a refusal to hear anything negative about your home country. Tartt explained that the general public consents to a perceived view of reality presented to us by the powers that be in return for the psychological benefits that we receive. We collectively decide what is and what is not considered a reliable source of information. States of consciousness, from altered states to the state earthlings call normal waking consciousness, have been Charles Tartt's speciality for 2 decades. Dr. Tartt no longer calls it normal consciousness. He has substituted what he feels to be a more accurate term, consensus trance. To him, the idea of normal consciousness is the kind of convenient fiction illustrated by the famous folktale of the Emperor's New Clothes. Together, human groups agree on what their perception should be admitted to awareness, hence consensus. Then they train each other to see the world in that way and only in that way, hence trance. It is not. Tartt went on to explain that if it is not in the media or academia, it does not happen and does not exist. If it did not happen and does not exist, but is in the media, including higher education, then we accept it and believe it. To protect our concept of reality, for which we have so much of our psyche invested, we turn to the media outlets as the established and accepted sources of truth to tell us exactly how the world really is. For the most part, this works very well, as the various media outlets in their differing ways serve only to reinforce the established status quo. It is also easier to blindly accept that the news, for example, is factual, accurate, and has no agenda dictating the topics presented, rather than admit we have been tricked and begin to unravel the web of lies. Sadly, therefore, we see that the media is not always reliable. Newspapers and televised news have a duty to draw in an audience and may be inclined to lead toward more entertaining and sensational aspects of the story in order to increase sales. More disturbing, though, is the fact that news outlets may not be the impartial organisations that they present themselves as. They have allegiances to far larger corporate entities that may affect our reception of facts in ways that we would not normally consider. Okay, well that concludes my talk, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to Andrew.
Well, what a fantastic talk by Neil there, and you can see just from what he's gone through an incredible amount of research, and I think it's set the tone for, you know, really thinking about what you're going to see today and how exactly what Neil's talked about covers up conveniently, you know, what we're going to talk about later. So I'd really like to thank Neil for a wonderful bit of research, and I look forward to getting hold of a copy of his book when it becomes available soon, and I believe it's going to be sold through Richard Hall's website. So you know, we don't have to turn it into a book promo, of course, but you know, it's important. I think from what the way Neil presented the information, I think it's going to make it accessible to people who are not. I know there's many people in this room, probably at different levels. Some people know, you know, very great deal about what we're talking about, and some not as much. So I think Neil's book will probably be a good introduction to this understanding that media covers things up. So thanks again, Neil, and thank you.
Thank you.